This is Jeremy Renta.
And this is Amy Solara.
And you have discovered Mantra and Magic,
a podcast where Eastern philosophy meets Western magical practice.
All right.
Hey. So, alchemy.
Yeah, just cut to the chase.
I can't not. It's too late. For both of us to dilly-dally.
Yeah.
Around this incredibly important subject.
No time to jibba-jabba.
I just had the picture of a Jabberwocky in my head and was like, is Alice in Wonderland an alchemical reference?
It was Brillig and the Slithy Toad. Did the gyre and the gimbal in the way?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Gotta go snicker snack.
Yeah, man. That dude was definitely on something.
The walrus and the carpenter.
Seriously. Well, yeah, I wonder what again, the more that I get deeper and deeper into my esoteric practice, I'm like, was that a story about Buddha and Jesus? Like, and then Jesus, it was religions that were consuming the masses that were following them. It's like, I don't know. That came to me when I remember watching Alice in Wonderland. After watching it as a kid numerous times, that was one that was always on repeat at my house. And I remember as an adult rewatching it, and I was like, well, that's really fucked up. This is like, it's like they're trying to get the clams to follow them. Jesus has got the hammer, and then and then Buddha or whoever the other one is consumes them all. And it's like, yeah, thought it was so very interesting. Anyways, so alchemy.
I never ever thought of that connection, but alchemy is definitely what Alice goes through. Expanding and contracting after eating magic mushrooms and drinking a brew.
Yeah, you just need a little bit, right?
Just little tiny bits. Eat one side of the mushroom and you grow taller. Eat the other side of the mushroom and you grow smaller. And anyone knows if you eat the whole mushroom, you do both.
Mm-hmm.
So I think something that both the Cosmic Serpent touches on and the book that my book club just read, Jaguar and the Body, Butterfly and the Heart, touches on is the idea that the plants taught us about all of this.
Mm-hmm.
They showed us these beautiful secrets. And there are so many ways of looking at alchemy. And I particularly touched on the physical during the Inner Alchemy Summit with Morgan, and which is available for purchase, by the way, and all the proceeds go towards food drive in, I think it's specifically in Denver, the one that she was doing, but there might be another organization that she's donating to now in light of all that's going on. But with alchemy, a lot of people think that it's literally just spiritual in nature, that they weren't actually trying to turn lead into gold. They were trying to uplift their soul. Whereas other people think that they were just early chemists and didn't know what the heck they were doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is the root of chemistry is chem, right? So it's the land of chem. So, I mean, I think that there is a correlate. And again, this is where you start to get into the separation of religion and science, right? So
alchemy becomes chemistry, astrology becomes astronomy. Right.
So I think that, I'd mentioned this before we got on, the whole idea that the thrice great concept of Hermes is that it works in three different worlds. It works in spiritual, it works in emotional, it works in the physical world. So being able, again, it's all of the stuff that we're talking about is looking at things in multiple dimensions, right? It's things always have more than one side. You can't have something stand on its own if it's in a two-dimensional space. There is a third prong somewhere that is connected that's propping up the entire idea. So, yeah, being able to kind of look at these aspects, which is what we're going to do tonight. I say tonight because it's almost very late. Yeah. Happy Mantra Monday for people that are who are in England, because we're already there. But
or tomorrow for
for
people in
everybody else,
Australia. Oh
yeah.
my gosh, that's so weird to me. That like arbitrary line that I feel like was just drawn, but I know somewhere deep down has to do with the planet turning.
Well, maybe again, if that's the if we go straight up and Mu is there or Atlantis is there, whatever it is, that other island, like maybe that's where a culture was actually started before we had that gigantic catastrophe 10 to 15,000 years ago and some shit sank into the ocean. So
Well, I think
maybe
that
that's
was
a
just
reason.
the big finale of the fall that was already happening
Hmm.
in the Ice Age. I that we need to do that episode too. Just
Yeah.
like the all the Graham Hancock, John Anthony West, Robert Schoch, Robert Duvall
Hmm.
spiral. Um, the little bit of Aubrey Marcus thrown in because he interviewed most of them, and Joe Rogan. So Alchemy as a
Randall
3-part.
Carlson, that's the other guy. Sorry, I should have thrown
Yes,
him in there.
you're
He's
right.
also
You should.
got to give credit where credit's due.
The 3-part process, I think, is also a reflection of the Hermetic principles of as above, so below, as within, so without.
Hmm.
If you do your inner work, the outer world will shift because the outer world is still something that you're perceiving. It feels like it exists on its own, but it's your lens. Like, and that's something that's so behind every philosophy in the world, right? If you look at a lot of the teachings in Eastern philosophies, karma is not good or bad. It's just how you view it. Someone's actions are not good or bad. It's just how you receive it or perceive it or project onto it. And Hermes Trismegistus, Thoth, as he's also called, or Mercury, as he's also called, because he has 3 names. Go figure. Hermes Trismegistus. I like him as Thoth. That's the one I relate to the most. But he taught us that everything that you do will have an effect on all of these levels. So if you go to therapy and you do emotional work and you begin to process your emotions, then your reactions start to become more useful and beneficial for your soul growth as opposed to just immediate emotional reactions. You start to witness them. And the more that you do that, the more you witness other people's reactions. And then the more you're able to process all that's going on around you. And you don't have this sensation that things are happening out of control because you're in control of yourself. And that's the only thing you can control.
Right.
And so if you can gain control of yourself, you can technically gain control of the world, which is really crazy to think about.
Yeah, and then you realize that how much of it is actually yours. You know, this was something I was talking to Anton, and I guess you were in the room. I don't know if you actually heard me talking
I was
about this
filling up
right
my water
beforehand.
bottle.
Yeah, right beforehand. But you know, the concept. I'm reading the Training and Work of an Initiate by Dion Fortune right now, and she talks about how almost like the same story we were talking about with Avalokiteshvara. As he was getting ready to step over the precipice and go over the wall and into
Nirvana.
bliss state, into nirvana, into samadhi, he turns around and looks back and sees the suffering, pain and suffering of humanity, and decides, you know what, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to come back when I need to, and I'm going to help out people whenever I can. So like, there's this concept that we make this choice to go down and to, you know, reincarnate and to put together our little mental and soul packet to go into a body. And each time that we do that, there is karma that comes along with that. You know, it's stuff that, you know, even if we clear all of our past karma and we clear all of our, you know, like I said last week, that family karma and our past lives karma are 2 totally different things. Even if we clear all of that stuff and we live up the straight and narrow and we're working, you know, middle pillar, and we're staying off of the extremes of each side. When you come back and you make those types of soul contracts, that's more karma that you're taking on. You know, and it's things that you have to be able to resolve before you can leave again. Like
Literally
and
every time
it
you
may be a
get a
little bit
human
easier.
body, literally every time you get a human body, you get karma with it because
Exactly.
it's just, I mean, I
It's
think,
part of the package.
yeah, like when you look at some of the accounts of Buddha and of Jesus, and that's just because we were talking about them with Alice in Wonderland, so they popped in my head. But when you look at their descriptions of their childhood, right? Buddha was carefree, he was joyful, he enjoyed his life, he even got married, he had a kid, and it wasn't until he was kind of in his 20s that he realized, oh, that world is fake.
Right.
Maybe there's suffering out there, and that's when everything changed. Jesus was a little bit more aware of it because he was born into a family of a lot of kids, a lot of sects of Christianity don't believe that. They think that
he was an only child.
He was an only child, and that all of the brothers and sisters were just like a sweet name for his friends. Whereas other lineages of Christianity, I guess you could say, truly believe that Mary and Joseph had multiple children after Jesus's birth and after they were officially married. And I, for one, believe that he did have physical brothers and sisters, and he had to deal with all of that, and he had to be in a space of social life, householder life. And there's karma that comes with that. There's reasons that he faced certain demons later on, whatever you want to believe that they were, his trials. And just like Buddha faced specific demons later on, just before they attained Christ consciousness and Buddhahood, like they were presented with the last of the karma that they had accrued in the lifetime, essentially, of jealousy and fear and greed and lust and all these things that we associate with the most negative types of human behavior. And they still had to clear those. So, like, no matter how good you live, because if you can live as good as Buddha and Jesus, damn. I know I haven't. And I think there's something really amazing that happens when you get to that point where you can just see so clearly the work you have left. And that's the fourth step in alchemy. So when we talk about the steps in alchemy, the first step is calcination. And that's really what's going on in the world right now.
Light it on fire.
Yeah, sulfuric acid combined with, it's just sometimes called vitriol, which I love that word. I don't know why. It's combined with a really dense, heavy metal, most commonly lead, and then it's lit on fire. And guess what's happening in the world? Everybody's getting presented with this dark reality of how our society works, and they're literally lighting things on fire. Like, if that's not calcination, in my notes I literally wrote burn it down. And then you take those ashes and you have to dissolve them, and that's the second step. You add in the feminine, you add in the unconscious, you add in the collective and non-rational rejected parts of ourselves.
And you stir it up.
And
you make sure that you can't tell the difference between one thing and the other thing.
Yeah. And then once it's fully blended, once every part has been completely broken down and mixed into a new homogeneous liquid substance, then you get the separation, separatio. And that is the filtration and discarding of anything that's ungenuine and unworthy, any material that is not going to uplift the process, literally. And it appears as white. Sometimes it appears as blue, and that's when they call it aquafortis. But it's like a baking soda almost. And when you think of baking soda, or at least when I think of baking soda, I think of it as the thing that can clean anything in the house. So it's this substance that you can use to literally scrub. It's almost like soap. And then you get conjunctio, which is the recombining of all the saved elements that were separated. And that's the joining of the masculine and the feminine. And that's what they call the lesser stone. And at this point, adepts can now clearly discern all that's left to be done. It's not that you did it. It's that now you see the entire road of what you still have to do in order to achieve lasting enlightenment. It's like the big aha, what most people would call a spiritual awakening at this point. And
Hmm.
so the first process is the intentional destruction of the ego, the removal of all pretenses that everything is okay. And then the next step is further dissolving the ego. Like anything that you thought you had gotten rid of, now it's coming back. Now it's coming up. And then from there, you start to be able to organize it and say, like, okay, this is actually a useful mechanism in my brain because it helps me interact with society. So I don't appear as an insane person living high in the mountains wearing a loincloth.
What's
And
wrong
that,
with that?
well, that's the part of me that understands clothing. It's like, it's okay that that stays. Um, and I think when we were talking about integration, integration is actually the third act of
Hmm.
alchemy. It's realizing, okay, this part of my humanness is useful for the human part of me, and it's not hindering my soul's growth.
Right. Well, it's also like disillusion and like recalcination, like bringing things back together. You, it doesn't mean that you're going to throw it all out from the outset, too. You know, like when
Right.
you go through a breakup or whatever, you have boxes of shit from old relationships. If you, you know, if you're trying to get into something new, you may buy, you know, I always come back to playing guitar. But if you, you know, you want to learn how to play guitar, you may have a bunch of books on guitar. You may have a bunch of like extra strings and stuff that you've bought that are around, and you're like, this is useful material. It's not useful now, so let's take it and put it somewhere where it may be of use later, and it's not cluttering up everything else that's going on. So some of the stuff is garbage, and this is part of this process, is getting rid of the shit that you don't use, right? You're getting rid of things that do not allow you to have you live your highest spiritual life or your best physical life. You know, if you see, this is where we check in patterns of what our behavior is
Mm-hmm.
too, and you can remove those types of things as well. It's like, all right, I'm going to do this, you know, twice this week, whatever it is. If it's, you know, going out to eat, or like when I was giving up drinking, like going to the bar, I would still, you know, I would still continue to do the normal routine, partially too, because you don't want to have that teetotaler aspect where you feel like you do something for 2 or 3 weeks and then you end up falling completely back into your patterns again. Like, be cautious with how you approach this part of it, the
Unless you're
separation
like me
stage.
and you're really good at cold turkey.
Yeah, you are, but you know, it also still takes you time to do things, because
Yes.
a couple of weeks ago we
Yes.
were talking about you're not eating sugar anymore, and I was like, when I lived with you guys, you ate chocolate chip pancakes
Oh yeah,
every fucking
literally.
morning,
Well, and
every
like an entire
morning.
box.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
So I was like, okay, and that's part of it, right? It's
Yeah.
like something that we hear and something that resonates with us. It still might take a little bit of a time for us to be like, yeah, I know that that's true, but right now these chocolate chip pancakes still taste really good. And I, like you said,
Yeah.
whether it's coming up with excuses or whatever, you're like, I got kids that I'm feeding and I need the energy. It's fine. It's not going. You're not going to build Rome in a day. You know, we're not.
Right.
Not everybody is Jesus. Not everybody's Buddha. Some of us come here, and again, we spend some time on the left hand path. We go down and we enjoy the sex. We disconnect from the
I
way
don't
that
know if
we
that's the
can.
left-hand path entirely. I think the right-hand path gets to enjoy physical sensations,
It.
and it
I'm not. Yeah,
needs
I'm
to
not
bliss.
saying. I'm not saying that it is only left hand path, but I'm just saying that with the left hand path, the way that it's at least viewed in a lot of in tantric aspects is that it is, you revel in the sex, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of people kind of see that as being indulgent. You know, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily, it's still on the, it's still on the spectrum, it's wherever it is, and having a healthy sex life is healthy. You know, it's denying it and then keeping it in the closet, or shutting away those desires, that is unhealthy. It's denying the aspects that actually make us human. So yeah, I mean, and with that type of thing too, you can start to realize that there is no reason to have shame in sex. There's no reason to have shame in enjoying anything. You know, it's just figuring out how it fits in with those aspects of your personality, and whether or not it actually is helping you to achieve your goal of living a higher spiritual life.
Well, this is what one of my teachers, Carolyn Elliott, has really successfully implemented with her trainings and her courses and her book that just came out. She's not paying me to say this. I just really love it. And our book club is reading it. for the month of June. It's called Existential Kink, and it takes the methods of alchemy and the nature of humans and it blends them in this really comical, messy, and very ordered way. So she gets you to investigate your unconscious. She basically takes you into the dissolution part
Mm-hmm.
really quickly. She just like burns through your ego so fast. So fast. We're just like, damn, I did do that to myself. And then she takes you into the dissolution, into the how did I quote it before? Taking all of the non-rational and rejected parts of yourself and bringing them into the entire whole and stirring
Mm-hmm.
them up and incorporating them. And then the more they become incorporated, the more you're able to separate out the patterns. And so using the dissolution process, you're able to move into the separation process much more quickly. It's like an accelerated version of alchemy
Mm-hmm.
by relishing the parts that we would normally associate as negative. So
Right.
for example, she has one where someone keeps having the same relationship pattern where they have someone who doesn't fully appreciate them and then they feel neglected. So then they go seeking what they want. They end up cheating and then the person they're with leaves them. And they do it over and over and over again. And they're like, why do I keep following this pattern? And one, they're not learning the lesson. Two, they're not admitting to themselves that that's what they want. And then three, they're not capable of seeing that it's coming from some other place of wanting to be fulfilled. And so she takes you into a process of one, acknowledging that you are responsible for every single action that has happened within your life. And so taking that responsibility is an ego destructor. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot have a a normal ego and take full responsibility for everything, because the ego, which likes to keep you safe, would rather you be either in a victim or a rescuer mentality.
See, I think that that's the healthy way that you live with ego, is being able to, again, allow it to be permeable. You have to allow your ego to be like membranous, just like we were talking about with the universe. There's going to be things that you're going to expand in. There's going to be things you're going to want to contract in, and being that is the ego is a useful tool, right? It's just
Well,
like
yeah, that's the separation process, right?
right,
There's parts of the ego that need to be salvaged, otherwise you literally go insane. You
right.
you either completely ascend, you like dissolve into a light body, or you go into a mental institution because you cannot function as a human being. So you
Hmm.
have to keep some of the ego, but the idea is you have to destroy enough of the ego that it's no longer driving the bus.
Right.
And so
It's something that's super interesting to me when it comes to like the whole concept of building the light body, which is what monks are doing. That's what adepts, or that's what you're attempting to do once you get into like a really strong practice of burning out a lot of this stuff. It's like there has to be, I think, at least a part of the ego that does continue on too, because that's how the stories of Jesus come back. That's how that concept of what Christ is, what the Christ consciousness is able to come back. And it's
well,
I
that's the
kind of
sixth step. You're skipping
yeah.
ahead.
Okay, well we'll slow down. But this was also something that I've been thinking a lot about when it comes to just like names. Again, I was reading through one of my books the other day and saw Thoth, and I was like, this is the first time, I don't know why, that I looked at it and I go, his name means thought. It's literally cohesive thoughts. Like it's something that a thought will continue on into another body, and his this or the concept will continue on to another body. And I was like, how have I never seen that as thought before? So
Well, there's so many things that come through with some of these names, and he's particularly interesting because he was the orchestrator of time.
hmm.
Like when you look at the way that he functions, he figured out, okay, this is how we're going to measure time. This is how we're going to keep track of time. This is how we're going to record time. This is how we're going to record everyone's names, everyone's experiences, how the
Hmm.
souls incarnate. And that's why the Akashic records are so clearly defined in a way that that feels like you're, I don't know, to me, when I open them, I feel like I'm opening a file cabinet. I'm like, okay,
Right.
let's go back to 1478 and see this name here, Margarita. Okay. So but he built it with Shisahat, who was the architect of the pyramids. She's the
Right.
one who would lay down the keystone. And the two of them working together with Ma'at, who's the one of truth, were making sure that everything was aligned to like true north and the true thought and the true word and the true action. And it, like you said, it takes three, right?
Yeah.
There's always these threes that occur. Isis and Osiris made Horus, and you get like these constant repetitions of how they all interact. And with alchemy, step 6, which is what you mentioned, is when you get into a space of ensuring that the impurities of the ego, or deeply submerged, unacknowledged desires are still operating, but they have been purified 100%.
Right.
Like, you are in a space where you still have a name, you still have a lineage and a family, you still have a set of tools and methods you're using, but you are no longer hindered or controlled by the unconscious in any way. Everything is completely conscious. You are completely aware of how every single aspect of your own internal universe operates, and therefore how the external universe operates.
Right.
And that's a really hard stage to get to. That is the stage of...
Not for me, bro. That was so easy.
Go live in a cave in the Himalayas. Himalayas. I hate it when people scold me for that. Like, you know what? I'm American, and this is how I say it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. When I get a chance to go to Nepal, if they correct me while I'm there, then I will start saying Himalayas.
So wait,
yeah.
what? So stage 5. So
Stage 5 is fermentation.
Fermentation, yeah.
And it's bringing the divine into oneself to continue the alchemical process. So conjunction, is when you recombine all the separated elements. So you're like, okay, this is the path I have to go on now. These are the things I have to study. Like, you're learning ceremonial magic, you're learning Kabbalah, you're learning how to incorporate sound technology from multiple systems. You are diving deep into the Sanskrit alphabet. Like, you have the tasks that will take literally a lifetime to master. And I have my own set. I have Kabbalah as well. I have alchemy. I have Hermeticism. I have certain aspects of witchcraft and sorcery and shamanism and magic. And I have yoga and mantra as well. So I know the things that I have to continue to keep studying. Like, astrology is the one I'm focusing on right now. And I'm in school for it. And I absolutely love it. And I feel like it's enlightening everything I do. And it has a similar set of tools that operate on an alchemical basis, because astrology is built on elemental building blocks, just like alchemy is built on the 4 elements. You have to have all 4 combined in order for it to work. In astrology, you find the unhealthy element or the missing element, and you help the client figure out how to incorporate that back into their life, how to start using that element as a lens or as a tool in order to balance themselves out, which is an alchemical process. And so for me, I feel like I keep returning to level 4 and just tapping into level 5 and then getting stuck back in 1 again and having to repeat the process. Because the second that I start to bring the divine within, I have to destroy the ego again. And then I have to go through dissolution and the incorporation of, oh, I didn't realize that I left that behind, and now it's back into the river of my conscious. And then start separating it out and say, okay, yeah, this year really was the year that I just cut out sugar 100% completely. I might have like a strawberry once a week. Literally one.
Yeah.
And so I've moved into a completely new space, and it's because I'm getting to number 4, conjunction, much quicker, because I've started tapping into number 5, which is drawing the divine within. And that's the soul connection that you and I have talked about frequently, of bringing the soul closer to the human body.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the refinement process takes a really long time, and that's it's understandable. There's a lot of things that we're still breaking down, and um, the the whole concept of like, I remember, who was it that got blinded on the road to Damascus?
He was Saul, he became Paul.
Oh, that guy, yeah. So
Yeah, he was persecuting Christians, and then he became one.
but that's the thing. However you feel about that story in the Bible, uh, the whole point is that he was doing a whole lot of really fucked up shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he had this awakening moment where he was blinded on the road. So it's like the information was there for him to take in, but because he hadn't done any of the clearing of all of his past karma and he was still technically doing the horrible shit. He was like blasted by his realization, and then had to go through a process,
Yeah,
of
to
like
get
to get to where he ended up supposedly.
well, but
And the
then
same
he
thing
rewrote
happened.
all of those books, and now the church is based off of everything that he wrote, and it pisses me off.
Yeah,
He didn't
like
like
I
his
said,
book.
there's not a bunch of there's always two sides of the story, and I have issues with Paul as it
Oh,
is, Pauline theology. But the same thing with oh God, see now it's fallen out of my head. The story of the seer of the um
Theseus?
no, 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 the one of the freight train mantras, the
Mm.
Gayatri, the seer of the Gayatri mantra, where he
Mm-hmm.
was talking about Vishista, um and
Vashistasa?
yeah, so he's going back, and he won't give him the cow, right? The whole story. This is where
Oh, yeah.
we're
So
going to butcher your
Vishvamitra.
Vishwamitra,
Vishvamitra.
yes. So there's the king who goes and he says he
He says,
meets
I
the guy
want
with the cow.
Vashistasa's cow.
Yes. So, and he's like, no, I'm not going to give it to you. And he's like, I want to become like you, right? So
Mm-hmm.
he gets to the point where he wants to become
A
he
sage.
wasn't a Brahma Rishi, he was a sage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he goes and he does so many penances that Brahma actually comes to him and goes, hey man, I'll give you all of these powers. And he's like, you can be a Brahma Rishi. He's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a Brahma Rishi. I want to be a sage. And he's like, well, if you want that, you're going to go have to talk to Vishwamitra. And he's like, this guy, he's the guy.
Vashistasa.
Vishwamitra.
Vishvamitra is the one who's learning from Vashistasa.
I think that is incorrect, but I'm
No,
going
because
to.
of the yoga poses, the
Oh
asana poses.
God! See now, I got to pull this
When
book
you're in
out and look at it.
Vashistasana, you're in side plank.
Uh-huh.
And when you're in Vishvamitrasana, you're in the arm balance where the leg is extended and one hand is holding on. You have to do side plank first in order to get to the other posture.
Okay, I'll
That's
give you
how I
this one.
remember.
Anywho, he Brahma tells him that he's got to go talk to him. So when he goes, he's like, I'm just gonna kill the dude. He grabs a rock. This is a guy who's achieved the level of consciousness that a god comes to him and goes, I'm gonna give you control over. You're a Brahma Rishi now.
Species.
You have the
Yeah.
control. Yeah, you have control over physical form. Um, and he goes to go murder this dude. And he's like, he gets there.
For
He's
this
talking, and
magical cow.
he can hear him talking. He can hear him talking to his wife, and he says, "So what are you going to do about this?" He's like, "Well, all he has to do is come and see me, and I will give him the ability to be a sage. He just has to come talk to me about it. And he falls down. He actually starts hitting himself in the head with a rock, and then Vashistasa comes
Yeah.
out, and he's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm not worthy of this," and that's when he receives his enlightenment. So it's the same type thing. He's done all of these things and still reached a really high level of sacred. His soul is at a really high level where he's actually able to converse with the gods, and his meditation practice is incredibly strong. But he still doesn't have control over his emotions, right? The same story with Moses. He had
Y'all
some
are cool.
issues.
Tablets break.
Yeah. These guys had issues when it came to anger management.
Yeah.
But
Which
they're
is why
still
they didn't achieve the Christ consciousness and the Buddhahood.
right.
They
Yeah.
became
So
great masters, great teachers, but they did not get to that. They didn't get past the sixth step.
right. So that's the thing. You still have to just keep on working on letting that shit go.
Yeah. So the seventh step, coagulation.
Yes, bringing it all back together.
It is. It's the hardest thing to do, and that's why it's also the easiest step in the alchemy, because distillation is being, like we said, in full. So okay, we'll go back. Conjunction, seeing the path ahead, seeing your true self, like a glimpse of who you could possibly be when the masculine and the feminine unite. These are the Ida Pingala traveling up, the black and gold snakes going up, the idea of the pineal gland being fully activated, and the lesser stone essentially is that. And then you're working towards the philosopher's stone, the great stone, gold. And so the next step, fermentation, is when you start to do this drawing down of the deity, your own highest self, to yourself, so that you're in constant communion with it and you're able to look at the even darkest parts of yourself, and that's the poison path. So that's when you start to see that your deepest shadows are your strongest medicine. And whether that medicine is meant for just you or for others doesn't matter. It's still your strongest medicine, and it's the hardest one to swallow.
Yeah.
And just total side note, but really cool, this process in the actual chemistry side of the alchemy was really crazy. It's called liquor hepatis, and it's originally made from camel dung by Egyptian alchemists who would do this process to it that would turn it green, and eventually it would become a really wonderfully smelling perfume called balsam of the soul. And it's partially the reason that they started doing it was watching the dung beetles, right?
Right.
Scarab beetles, Kepper, and seeing how the beetle would take something that is just shit and turn it into life, because it would lay its eggs inside, and then there would be this abundance of food for the next generation to have. And it was the idea that it was willing to work with it and therefore turn it into something else. And that process is the same imagery that we kind of have to use with like our most shameful aspects of ourselves. The parts that make us feel the most guilty, the most afraid, the most disgusted are the parts that are going to make us the strongest and most beautiful beings we will ever be, shining our brightest light because we've been willing to go down and invest in the darkness. And so that's the fermentation, and it's literally what it sounds like. You have to kind of stew in your own shit until it turns into something useful. And then distillation comes from that. So then you distill the fermented aspects, and you have to boil it and condense it even further. So thinking of like the process that Buddha went through under the Bodhi tree, where he just sat for so long in that light, letting the demons come to him and just turning them away one by one until he was left with nothing but the light. And then he got to the seventh step with the rishis, the sages that you're just talking about. Vashistasa was content with where he was. He was in the distillation process, but he did not move forward to the seventh step. And I think you can almost say some of the bodhisattvas didn't either, and some of the beings we call deities or master teachers didn't either, because they wanted to continue to work with us. They wanted to maintain that purity of ego that is still ego, in the sense that it's still something that identifies as whole unto itself. So it's not separate in the sense that we perceive right now in this like physical separation. It's capable, this type of being is capable of being in more places than just one. They're capable of transcending time and space. They're capable of doing all of these great magical acts that we associate with miracles and myths and legends, but they are still them. They are inherently them. They're recognizable, right? When you get to the seventh process, that's full ascension. That's going back up into the light. And you can choose to come back out of that, but it's the ultima materia, the soul. And when you get to that complete sense of wholeness, well, then you've learned all your lessons. And unless you just find it really entertaining to incarnate, there's no point in coming back.
Well, see, I kind of wonder about this when it comes to consciousness on other planes and in other states, which is, I think, luckily, maybe can lead us into next week's topic, because we kind of talked about elementals, and I think that's still, I don't know if that's technically incarnating, right? Like if you come back and your focus is mainly on fire and you become a fire spirit. So you're like, I believe that there's energy that's coming out of the sun. There's obviously things that are living there as well. It might not be in the same form that we're in, but those energetics are there. That's the
Yeah.
whole idea of sylphs and the idea of salamanders, and like these salamanders is the term we use for them, but that's
Which is
using
so
our
ironic
words.
because like
Yeah,
lizard that is
yeah.
like water lizard.
It's
I
dragons,
see.
right?
That would be
Yeah.
a whole other conversation unto itself because for me, I feel like elementals are more closely related to animals in the sense that
Hmm.
like animals in our world have an oversoul, right? They're
Right.
not. They technically have their own individual soul forms, I think, in some cases, but in other cases, I think it's like a hive mind or this kind of like
It's like a mushroom.
yeah. There's a whole host of bodies that are all connected to one soul essence. And there's so many like theological debates that can go around with this, and depending on whether you believe in animism or polytheism or pantheism, and just all the isms. Um, and I think that, like, if you were to look at angels,
Hmm.
and if you were to look at dragons, and if you were to look at the Fae, and if you
Hmm.
were to look at certain galactic beings, um, then you're talking about a different level of ascension than the elementals
Right.
in a
Well, and
spirit sense. Whereas I think like animals versus humans are on a different level of ascension. I think maybe there's some animals who've surpassed us, like
well,
dolphins.
they're still incarnating, I think, and that's part of having carnal form. Like you have incarnated. You
Yeah.
have a physical forms, which is a combination of all of those aspects,
Yeah.
right? It's Yeheshua. It's earth, water, air, fire, spirit. Um, so for those other pieces, there's obviously an intelligence that's there whenever you work with angels, and if you're casting a pentagram, or if you're we'll say casting, um, and you're pulling in energetics that's water, then you're going to get emotional spirits, right? You're going to work
Right.
in that level of reality.
Yeah, like
If
undines are pure emotion.
Right, exactly. So they exist, and they have to exist somewhere, right? We can't see
Mhm.
them, but we know that aspect is there, because when you light a fire, it burns, it does its thing. There's life coming out, or it's like the wood that's burning is giving life to the flame, right?
Mm.
So, and then when it comes to angels and devils, like when it comes to that, the polarity spectrum that's on it seems to be a light spectrum, right? Because you have, once you get down to if you
I don't
start
know. I
out
feel
in
like
your,
they're two different groups.
I think that I think that they're all in the same thing. I think it's you start to get to where, again, on the light spectrum, if you're looking at a rainbow, you have different angelic energies and different angelic, different
Maybe
names
it
of
depends
God
on.
that exist inside of that part of the spectrum of light. So in purple, there's an aspect that's there, in white, that's pure divinity, because it's all colors, right? It's all colors of the spectrum. And then as you start to get down, and you get down to you get down to Malkut and below into the Qliphoth, which is the reversed tree of life, which is actually going down into dirt. That is varying levels of compression in light, right? So when you look at a black hole, and you start to see that, just like once you go through there, it's the same thing on the other side. It's just the opposite end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, you
So,
could say it's the mirror that has above
right,
so below. I
right.
just I think it depends on the order of angels you're working with or the lineage
Mm-hmm.
of angel teachings you're working with, and the angels that I work with might be different than the ones you're working with because you're doing ceremonial magic, so you're getting the Order of the Golden Dawn, whereas mine was coming from um, slightly different
Right.
traditions and not Christianity, and so they're how I don't know if they're like a different class of being. I see them also overlapping with certain galactic races. Like
Right.
that's why I don't think it's just a ends of a poles
Mm-hmm.
per se, because I don't think that certain ones of these beings that we would call angels, because humans don't have enough words for everything in English, um, they might not be the same as some other angel types of beings. And I think that's why we see some of them as like um balls of fire with eyes and wings all over them.
Right.
And other ones look like humans to us, maybe with wings, maybe without. And so I think there's actually, I mean, that's why we need to go into like all sorts of being stuff. But there, from my understanding, there have been races of beings who've ascended on their home planets into higher levels of energetic states who act as angels in other parts of the universe. Does that make sense?
It does. And I guess that's the kind of the stuff that I was talking about before with like the sizes of our bodies, right? So it's like if you are live on a planet that has where you're 25 feet tall, the amount of light that's going to be traveling through your nervous system is going to be larger. You're going to be able to conduct and move that type of light through. You're going to be able to breathe in more air. You're going to be able to build your light body a little bit more.
Those cases of like the Tibetan monks who the more light energy that they worked and the more that they activated their light body, the smaller their physical bodies became.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of it too. Like when people talk about gray aliens, they don't have gravity, right? They still have form. They still have arms and limbs and a gigantic head. So it's like if they don't have to worry about moving around as much, they're going to have a smaller frame. And if they exist and communicate on a higher level, then they're going to use a lot of telepathy, right? Their brain stem and their brain casing is going to be a lot larger because that's where the energetic is focused. Whereas we are pretty balanced out. We're more dense in the legs because of gravity. We've got some space in our gut. We've got space in our lungs. As you move up, you've got a lot more and more space until you get to your brain, which is a lot of fluid, and our brains themselves are pretty mushy. It's pretty tangible. It's pretty floopy.
Just an electrical mush.
Right. So I kind of wonder about that type of thing too, with like how we would change physically the further away from a gravitational pull we would get. And that also changes time, right? Like when you start to get outside of a gravitational form of a sun or having a planet, then time starts to slow down because you don't have something that's dictating, you're being pulled further and further into the earth. So,
well, we're only basing things off of Newtonian physics right now.
Right.
Have to throw that out because.
Well, that's all we know at the moment, to be completely honest.
That's all we think we know, and I think it's actually very wrong. I think it's a perception that we've been taught repeatedly for a long time now.
Well, I don't understand quantum physics enough to be able to break it down, but I know that there have teachers that I have found that do a lot of work with Sanskrit and with Vedic philosophy that draw correlates when it comes to string theory and when it comes to quantum mechanics of the way that things are made up and built. And again, that starts to get into the more basic precepts of what yantras are, which we talked about before too, of like, this is the yantra is the geometrical symbol or geometric symbol that represents what the energetic is. And I think that that's really just like a zoomed in close up view of what cells look like or what the sound vibrations look like inside of our bodies. So, that's definitely a completely different topic.
Well, it makes sense. If you're talking about alchemizing things, if you're talking about ascension,
right,
that's what come up. To my own understanding of it, it's less about the physical form. Like almost the physical form is a vehicle for lessons and for the alchemical process, and the physical form becomes something that is both prized and not necessary at the same time. And once you can hold that balance of like gratitude and non-attachment, then you've succeeded in the alchemical reaction.
You have to study something until you break it down completely and you understand how important it is that it's not important anymore. There's a lot of magical practices that are that way, where it's like John Dee, when he and I think it's Kelly, I can't remember again, I always forget what his
Edward Kelly.
Edward Kelly,
Those
When they were building,
wackadoos. I can't stand those guys.
oh yeah, the worst. When they were building the tablets to be able to communicate with the angels, they spent, years putting together these tables that had the different colors and the different numbers that were on them. And then once it got to a point where they had the tables built, they're like, we don't need these anymore. We don't have to communicate with these guys because you figure out what the symbols are. So,
Yeah.
at a certain point, these are all just different ways of reaching the divine, right?
Yeah.
It's whether you're doing it through music or doing it through whatever else it is. But this comes back to just the idea of study too. You look at something until the symbol makes sense to you, and then you don't need the symbol anymore. And then
Yeah.
when you see the symbol anywhere, it's already integrated in you, right?
Well, Don
You're
Juan
attuned to
talks
it.
about this
Yeah.
in Carlos Castaneda talks about this in his teachings of Don Juan. The idea that he's asking the shaman for all of these tools and all of these ways of doing yaqui sorcery, and the shaman looks at him and he's like, that's for beginners who don't know better.
Yeah.
Let's get you some allies.
Mm-hmm.
And the allies are the real teachers, and you can have these tools, you can have these little magic tricks, and they work, but eventually you don't need them anymore. And it's like the idea of having the cup and the wand and eventually not needing the physical representations. And so alchemy transcends even that, where in the book The Alchemist, I mean, we haven't even talked about that. I love how that happened. He talks about all of this, and it's so beautiful. If you haven't read it because you were maybe like me for many years and it's just like, I can't read it if celebrities are reading it.
It's on the New York Times bestseller list. I refuse.
Yeah. So, but actually, though, when I read it a couple years ago, I was like, oh, that's why everyone was talking about it, because
Right.
they were actually tapping into something. He talks about the emerald tablets. He talks about the process and how the kid, he thinks he's like searching for this treasure and searching for this treasure. And he realizes, like, partially along the way, oh my God, it's the journey,
Mm-hmm.
it's the process. And he gets to this point where he has released all attachment to finding the treasure he was originally trying to seek, and only wants to be in a space of love and gratitude and enjoying life, literally just living life every day. And when his life becomes threatened, he's able to step into this place of calm and use magic in a way that he didn't even know he was capable of, and become the wind. And you could say that he created an illusion. You could say that a freak act of weather happened that day. You could say that he literally did an act of sorcery. But regardless of whatever happened, it was a miracle. It saved his life, and it allowed him to go back to the woman he loved. And then he was like, you know what? I want to show you my hometown. And that's where the treasure was all along.
He's Walter Mitty, and he had it in his wallet the whole time. What a fucking idiot.
I was listening to that soundtrack yesterday.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's so funny. I was listening to that soundtrack yesterday and was thinking how applicable to this conversation it is. And the idea that you, like the line that Jose Gonzalez sings over and over again, dawn is coming, and you open your eyes,
mm-hmm.
and you feel that feeling of, oh my gosh, this is what it is to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the ultimate lesson of alchemy, and why I think so many don't get to the 7th step. It's because they realize that it's more fun to just be in the process.
Yeah. I mean, who wants to get to the 7th step, really?
I think there are a lot of beings who have the potential, like I said, bodhisattvas and these other super master teachers who are really amazing and really knowledgeable and really wise. And they're like, yeah, I could do it at any time. And I'm choosing to stay here so that other people can also do it.
Well, I think too, like once you've gotten rid of, part of the whole alchemical process is removing fear. So you're not scared of coming back and having to deal with some of the natural human bodily bullshit that we have to deal with. You're
not scared of blowing up your laboratory.
Yeah, it's like, whatever, we'll just do it over again. Or you got kind of a Rick and Morty mindset, and you're like, there's another me out there anyways. It doesn't really matter. There's it's just a shift up on the spectrum.
You're like, in some parallel universe, I'm succeeding at this right now.
I'm so winning right now somewhere else.
But in some parallel universe, you're not. And I think one of the beauties of starting to work with really out there ideas like quantum realities, quantum leaps. The idea that there are parallel U's, every decision that you make branches off into like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 options, depending on whatever it was that you were choosing.
Right.
It can be daunting to think about, and at the same time it can be really wonderful to think about, because if everything like goes belly up in this lifetime, you're still succeeding somewhere else. You made the right choice. And the thing is, you always make the right choice no matter what. Even if it doesn't feel like it immediately, it's the right choice for the lifetime you're living.
Yeah.
Because it's taking you onto the path. And there are times when you deliberately choose to go off the path, and that's just a different kind of lesson. You're prolonging the inevitable, and you're probably experiencing more pain and suffering as a result, as your human brain perceives reality to be. But no, regardless, there is only the eternal dialogue that will just keep going, I think.
Well, this is, I think I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Like, this is the whole, you must die to this world to come to know me thing. Like, it's really strange because I really don't know the Bible that well. I was raised in a Christian church. I went and I listened to whatever the guy was saying up on the podium Sunday, from 11 to noon. And I did Bible study. I did that kind of thing. But there's only certain things that are very present in my mind. And like, the ones
Clearly
that
your mom didn't have you highlight enough for me.
she didn't, and I'm very grateful for that, because I can pick out the ones that I can focus on and think about. And like, the "you must die to this world to come to know me" is a big one. For born this day in the city of David, a savior who is Christ the Lord. Like, the whole idea of where these things, and like, again, contemplating or concentrating on those and saying, you know Jesus being born in a manger is like the big ideas usually come from really, really small things. The whole idea of like, you must die to this world to come to know me. For me, the whole thing with initiations, I dug a hole in my backyard and went out and buried myself in it at 4 o'clock in the morning. Like, that was my like burial that I did. Like, I did a ground burial, and it's amazing the stuff that like I let go of. I felt like going back into the earth and like coming out of
Have
that
you
feeling.
read Jaguar and the Body, Butterfly and the Heart?
I haven't.
Oh
No.
my God, you need to. He does that ritual every year on his birthday, but he actually digs a 6-foot hole deep grave, and they put logs over him about 3 feet in, and then a tarp, and then they fill the rest of it with dirt.
I didn't really want to go 6 feet in. I thought that, 1 or 2 was probably enough. So.
But we were talking about that in the book club today, because we did the final call for that book, and the alchemical process of dying to your old self every year, shedding the skin, shedding the skin, and being in a space of release is something that the Christian church co-opted for baptism, right? You die to your old self when you go down in the water, you come up a new being. And paganism has had so many rituals and so many initiation ceremonies that are based on that death process but it's because of calcination. It's because of the first step.
Right.
It's that dying of the ego.
Right.
And a lot of people mistranslate that, and they
think that you have to die and go to heaven. Yeah, that's definitely not the case. But I mean, again, whether it's a physical, like I said, the whole initiation idea of it, there is something that is triggered in you when you start to kind of like put these correlations together, that death is just a part of the process, and it's not like the big death, the big D. It's like,
although death would be an awfully big adventure.
It certainly would. And hopefully I come back with great blonde tips like that kid did in Peter Pan.
Oh my God, that was amazing.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, I was just saying, it's like, when it comes to that type of thing, because this is Joseph Campbell-esque. This is all like the way that we're able to actually understand is through the archetypes of what we are and what we're capable of. So it's
I also think some of those archetypes are real and legit, and this is what we can talk about when we do the Graham Hancock, John Anthony West episode. Is we have lost touch with the rituals that prepare us for death.
Yeah.
And that's why we fear death, because we've been through it so many times now without the proper spells to get through the gateways.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wonder, like, what happens to the souls that get devoured by meat.
Yeah.
And the idea that you become nothingness, and it's like, do you have to start over at the beginning, like incarnating as a completely new type of being, like a newbie in every sense of the word, because you've gone into the opposite of wholeness. You've gone into complete
Complete disintegration.
scatteredness.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, oh God, that terrifies me. That's the ultimate type of hell to me, is the thought that you don't get a chance to start over. You don't get to reincarnate. And the Ojibwe actually had a really similar myth. And if you read America Before, then you will find exactly what I'm talking about. Of you traverse these different aspects of the sky, and they would point up to the Milky Way and say, you have to go here and you have to go here. And then there's this like bone crusher person, and you have to dodge them. And they would talk about it like normal, like you when the sun sets in the west, that's when the souls go, and it's your chance to go with the gateway. And if you miss the gateway, then you're stuck on the earth for a certain amount of time until the sun gets to the same point, and then the gate opens and you go in. And that's why we have ghosts, is because nobody gets the rituals anymore that prepare you, like the alchemy during lifetime, that
Right.
prepares your ka, your energetic body, to release the physical and detach from the ego in that sense, and say like, okay, I'm moving on into my next spirit form, my next name. And how do we unite into the soul, so much so that our spirit and soul merge, and we're able to become eternal in that sense, in and shed the physical, let the physical return to the earth, and let our soul become this being that either chooses to go experience the Elysian fields or the Duat, or I mean, they didn't, the Duat itself was the scary place.
Right.
The gates past that, right? You wanted to get into the halls, or like in I almost said with the Valkyries. Yeah, with the Valkyries. Those halls, like there's all of these places that are discussed as like the lands of honor,
Mm-hmm.
that you get repose, you get to rest, your soul gets to rest, like the Isle of Apples. And then there's places in the underworld where average souls get a chance to rest too, and become young again until they're ready to be babies, and then they reincarnate. And that's a like almost a reverse alchemical process, which I find absolutely fascinating. I don't think enough people talk about.
Well, I would like to learn more about reverse baby moldings or whatever you said.
It's actually in the Nana Ereshkigal myth from Sumeria.
Yeah.
And it's also in Egyptian myth. There's a couple goddesses that are said to nurse the dead. And there's images of the pharaoh like suckling goddesses.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the idea that it makes the soul prepared to be born into a physical form. And it doesn't necessarily say like a human form again, right? I feel like if you succeed, if you say all of the negative confessions to Ma'at, right, where you say like, oh, my heart is pure, and you pass that feather weighing test during
Mm-hmm.
death, and then you get a choice at the end. And this is like in multiple myths around the world. You choose, do you want to come back to Earth and be a human who's like a warrior for truth and teaching others? Do you want to go experience something in a different galactic center that's like a different way of interacting with duality and binary reality, or like a triplicity or a quadruplicity? Like, do you want to experience something on the fifth dimension, like the Hathors? Do you want, like, what do you want to do? Because you succeeded, so now you get
Right.
to choose. And I think a lot of souls recently have turned back around and said, I need to get back to that planet. We
Yeah.
got to do something. we gotta figure this out. And that's why I think a lot of people are saying like we're beginning to really rejoice in the physicality of it, of the human form, in a new way, in ways that we haven't since the beginning of the Kali Yuga. It's like current cycle, because we're here on purpose.
Right.
Or not everyone is. I think the people listening to this podcast are, because you found it and it's not exactly advertised. So there's the sense that the majority of the planet, because the opportunity is there, so many souls are just coming straight back. They're not taking the time to rest. They're bringing all their karma with them.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of haphazardly reincarnating in ways that are clouding the possibilities of their ascension. And personally, I feel like a lot of them, it's that hermetic philosophy of don't throw your pearls before swine that
Right.
got adopted and co-opted by Judaism and then Christianity. And I think Islam says it as well. And it's just that idea of a lot of these teachings fall on deaf ears. The ears are not ready to hear. The eyes are not ready to see because their souls were not prepped.
That's really interesting. That, I mean, again, we talk about too with both of us having worked with colleagues so much that there is stuff that happens in between, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like this whole concept that there's disillusion or there's a dissolve,
Mm-hmm.
a dismembering. Going from being remembered, where you're reassembled, to completely
Mm-hmm.
dismembered, is it's instead of thinking about death as like going into the shop and doing work on your soul, because that's really what you're doing. I mean, when you're here, we're doing the triple thing, right? We're working on our mental
Yes.
state. We're appreciating and trying to build more of our memory, so that when we do come back, it's like I said, it's a bookmark in our book. We pick up and we go, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is where we were. Let's make sure that I get through grade school, and then I can, we can start doing some more of this work. Unless you're Jesus or some
Or Merlin. They
or
said that Merlin direct reincarnated, that he
yeah,
came back with all the memories of his immediately previous lifetime because he was working with the same family so that he could be there for Arthur.
right. Or J. Krishnamurti. It's like these these
Mm-hmm.
these people who've come in and start from a very young age. Someone sees it and is able to kind of nurture them and bring them to where they need to be. And I know that this is like a basic tenet, but just the concept of coming back as a teacher is so beautiful. And I know that people talk about that with kids. They're like, he's my greatest teacher. He really shows me the things that I'm ignoring. And
Yeah, it's like
pa-
having a live-in Zen Buddhist master protecting you all the time.
it's I don't know if it's just, again, I don't know where I am when it comes to my soul journey, but it's like I feel so much still like a kid, that's part of it too. Like, and it's interesting to me when it comes to like when people decide that they're going to stop believing. Like, when is it that you pull the Wendy card and you say, I'm going to be, I'm going to
I'm gonna
grow
leave the
up and I'm going to
nursery
do,
now.
yeah, I'm getting out of this shit. Yeah. Because there's that whole beginner's mind thing is something that's obviously taught throughout most Eastern philosophies. And it's incredibly important to have that sense of wonder,
I feel
of
like it's
like,
when the souls get tired of being beaten down.
yeah,
Because I feel like every single child comes in with that magic and wonder. And that's why they said to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must have like a mind of a child.
yeah.
And we have so many biblical references today. It's crazy. Um, there's this thing that I've seen as a mom, right?
Mhm.
Where I'm questioned about something because all 3-year-olds are they have like a repeat push button. The second you say something, they say, why? But why? But why? And I think there's a lot of parents who just say, stop asking.
No, you have to be like, ask better questions. Ask what? Ask
No,
how.
I will just keep going. He'll
Yeah.
say, but why? And I'll say, well, that's the way that most adults agree reality works. And I'll say, why? And I'll say, because they've given into the system. And I'll say, why? I'll just keep giving him answers until he looks at me like, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. And I think it's because I don't ever want him to stop asking. I don't ever want to give him that sense and that his curiosity is a hindrance or an annoyance or something to be tamped down. I want him to maintain that curiosity completely. And I also want them to constantly wonder. Quest goes outside all the time now. And he's like, oh, Mom, a creature. Down. And it's probably the same ant that we saw yesterday. But to him, it's amazing. And he watches it until it crawls back into the grass. And most humans, I don't think, get that experience on this planet, right? You see, or at least I see when I go to, or when I used to, like before all of this craziness started, when we could just go to playgrounds, which is so dumb. I really want to just rip out the construct, like the caution tape. They literally caution taped all the swings so that
Yeah.
you cannot sit on them. Um, and I would see other kids who came into families who didn't really care, whose parents were just forcing them to take pictures, even though the child was like, I want to play. And they're like, we need 2 more shots. Oh my God, who are you being sponsored by? Or the child would say something like, hey, mom, look over there. And the mom would say, yeah, whatever. And would just stay on her phone.
Right.
Or I would see like a child say something about a bug and instantly the parent would smash it
Mm-hmm.
and like just teach them, oh no, we don't want that in the world.
Yeah.
Squash. um and there's this pervading sense of like disrespect for the child's inherent curiosity. And I
Right.
think that's why the group of mamas that I'm with, I'm so grateful for, because all of us are really pushing for child-led learning in every sense of that word, where it's like, do you want to go to school? No. Okay, then we'll homeschool. Do you want to go to school? Yes. Okay, then I'll find you a school that supports what you want, whether
Right.
that's art or science or music or gardening or mechanics. I don't know, whatever you're interested in. And so um, the human soul, I think, is very intentional in where it comes in if it is a teaching soul. And I think that's why so many times you hear the phrase like, oh, that kid's an old soul,
Mm-hmm.
because we recognize it instantly. There's something about children of recent generations, I think as far back as even our parents, they would say things like that, right? In the 60s, the hippies would all be like, that's an old soul. But you recognize the teachers right away of, oh, you're here on purpose,
Mm-hmm.
versus the other ones where you're like, you're here because you didn't know where else to go. And there was an opportunity because people were being careless.
And now here you are.
Yep. And I also think there's a lot of souls who are coming to do work uh, that is literally just to clear the trauma of generations, whether that's like a Jewish lineage with the Holocaust, or African lineage, or indigenous lineage, or like regardless of where in the world they're coming in. I think there's some souls who are uh, almost bearing the burden of generations in a way that is actually capable of being cleared.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about this the other day when it comes to what jobs people are doing that, it's not getting a lot of press. Like you're saying, like these souls that are coming in to do work for huge cultures, they might not be announcing it on Instagram, or they might not be talking about it, like and getting press coverage, but it's like that type of work I think is being done. I think it's a huge part. And um, you know, there's there are saints everywhere, and they don't all have they're not all related to or connected to a religion.
And they
They're
don't all
doing,
have good PR agents.
yeah, and it could just be that it's a small thing. I realize too, um, that places where I end up and people that I work on, or conversations that I may have been part of the reason why I'm here. And it may be super low key, and it may be something that's like a mental time bomb that goes off, 5 or 10 years later, for me having a conversation with somebody.
And then you integrate it finally.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like with the leaving the space that I've been seeing clients in. Our lease is up, so I'm transitioning into a new location, and I've seen a relatively good amount of people there. Not a lot, but it wasn't like I haven't really had like a large connection. Today was my last day there. Saw my last client, and Lindsay and I, when we were closing the space out earlier today, she was like, I want to do a thing that I call a memory and a wish. She was like, so say what your favorite memory was in the place, and then a wish for either the space itself or for the people who are going to come in and rent it. And the one thing that really stood out to me was doing the clearing on the space, which I've talked about, I think, in one of the first couple of podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
of actually dropping in and literally like allowing the energies that have been collecting in that place for so long to just, again, give them permission. Like we talked about last week, say, I'm going to open this door, this portal for you. And if you need to talk to my guides, or if you need to talk to, if there's guides that you've been looking for, I'm going to give you this chance to kind of like get out of here, And
Mm-hmm.
every time I've been back since then, the place feels so much better. And it almost felt like after I had done that clearing, it was like my work here's done. I literally could leave the space and not feel like I'd had any more work there to do. So when I was closing out the space today, I was like, there were no tears. It wasn't a big emotional, disconnect, but I was just like, thanks for the opportunity to do this. And I feel that sense of relief that's there. I think I'd said too, that it felt like things were kind of seeking me out for a couple of weeks after that. And same thing, I kind of set up our house here where it was like, if you're looking for that, the guides are outside. You can find them next to the tree, next to the abalone shell, and there will be somebody who will guide you where you need to go. And um, there's a lot of lost souls, like you talk about with ghosts and that type of thing. They don't know what to do. Like if there's been a lot of trauma and spirits are kind of stuck on this plane, they want to go. They want to be able to again be given permission to like let go of whatever it is that they're holding on to. So, and I think that ties back into finding out what your gift is. Like I'd said, I'd never really thought of myself as being an intuitive in that way. And um, that's become one of my biggest things. Like when I'm working on somebody and I feel something that is energetically that they're holding on to, I'm just like, you don't need to be here, dude. Like you can let go. And the reaction that I get from my clients physically a lot of times is they may not even realize what it was. It's like, I felt a really big relief when you did this. I had a client a couple of weeks ago or last week that I worked on that, afterwards she was like, I always go to a therapist to have physical work done. She was like, but you're so much more energetic. And I wasn't really doing like deep work on her legs. She was like, there was a release that I had. She was like, my legs started shaking, and then it just felt like the whole thing just kind of like relaxed. And I was like, well, that's your muscle unwinding. Whatever the tension was that you were holding on to, it was given permission to let go.
Mm-hmm.
So figure out, you may not figure out what it is that your gift is, but just know that by living your best life that you're going to have a positive impact on somebody or something. And it may be that you save a gnat from, or a fly, and you take it outside, or a spider without killing it. It's like having
Like
that
I said, we
influence.
live with Zen Buddhist
Yeah,
masters. The second we
seriously.
kill any bug, they're like,
Why would you do that?
no.
Yeah, what was it doing to you?
So yeah, they won't let us. So now we
Yeah.
catch flies. I have literally caught 3 flies today
Mm-hmm.
and taken them outside.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to close the door real quick so they don't come back in. Um,
And this is where
and
the magical practice comes in with using mantra, because I did the same thing. I caught one this morning and I grabbed a glass. I put my hand on the back end of the glass and I cleaned to attract it in. It flew into the glass. I covered the top and I took it outside. So it's
well,
small
that's
magic,
very
but it's
magical. I
it's
just
small
put apple
magic, but it's
cider vinegar and lemon.
well, I was gonna say it's small magic, but it's still magic.
It
So
is still magic.
so
Yeah, you did
start
it the magic way. I did it the practical way.
put some apple cider vinegar and lemon in there. Is that a thing? Is that what the flies like that?
I don't know why, but okay, so Anton makes this really great homemade electrolyte drink that
Mm-hmm.
has a little bit of lemon juice,
Yep.
mostly purified water, and a little bit of apple cider vinegar and some stevia and
A little splash of cinnamon. That sounds
yeah,
good.
and
Yeah.
and then he puts in potassium and magnesium.
Yeah.
And it's really delicious, and our baby Quest likes it, and Blue won't drink it, but Quest will, and Quest never finishes it though, so his little Darth Vader cup sits out on the counter, and that's where the flies go. And I caught 3 flies that way, where I just noticed them kind of inside the cup, and I just casually put my hand on top and could
Yep.
feel them like bumping against my hand, like, oh no, I'm trapped. And I was like, just calm down, we're about to go outside,
Let me
you'll
get the
be fine.
dough. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I never would have attempted to catch spiders before. We literally cleared off 10 caterpillars from the snapdragons today without killing them. We put them in a different pot with trimmings because the babies wouldn't let us kill the caterpillars.
Yeah.
And
Those are perfectly
so
good butterflies. Those are
I
pre-butterflies.
know. That's what Blue kept saying. He's like, they're going to turn into butterflies. You can't hurt them. So we're like, well, they need to eat something. So I guess we'll just take these leaves they already chewed up like crazy and give it to them. I don't know if they're still alive. They probably died in the heat. So we'll see. It does totally shift your energy when you start to look at every living thing as having some purpose and some
Yeah.
point of being here, because it means that you have a point and a purpose to be
Yeah.
here.
Exactly.
And it's that as within, so without again. Like the second that you start to have a purpose, you realize everything in the ecological system has a purpose. That poison ivy grows on the places where hikers walk the most because the earth is saying, stop walking on me. Like all sorts of stuff in that kind of
Well, lectins,
path.
right? Like the whole idea
Yeah.
of plants producing lectins to be like, stop eating me. I'm going to give you cancer or whatever the thing is, whatever
Yeah,
the
or just
illness is
like,
that it
I just don't
causes.
want to get eaten by predators yet because
Yeah.
my fruit isn't ripe.
Right.
So that, and yeah, there's, I mean, nightshades automatically sounds poisonous. So I don't know why people still eat all the nightshades.
How did we get to eating tomatoes? Like that's what I remember too. Is like nightshades were a bad thing,
Yeah.
and then for some reason eggplants and peppers and tomatoes and potatoes are like on every plate. And I think that
I
is
mean,
partly too is like getting away from our roots as being connected to the planet. Go talk to
yeah.
the lady in the cabin in the woods, and she'll tell you that that's a bad idea. You can use it to cause some. You can use it for other things, but you don't necessarily want to. You don't want to
Use it for
consume it
that.
on a daily
And
basis
if you're gonna eat tomatoes, you have to peel the skin and
and
take
take
the
out the
seeds
seeds.
out.
Yeah.
And you just eat the flesh, and that still has a lot of sugar, so you only want to do a little bit as like a garnish for flavor. And there's so many ways that people used to prepare food where it was part of the culture, right? It would take days and days
Mm-hmm.
and days to prepare quinoa and beans and cassava root. And if you didn't, like especially cassava, and Graham talks about this in America before, Spaniards were getting like near death food poisoning because they were eating cassava root that wasn't properly prepared, and it has cyanide in it.
And a little bit
That's
of
why you
that's
feel like
great.
crap when you eat it. Yeah. Okay. So, and the natives knew you had to peel it, and then you had to grate it really finely, and then you had to
Soak it.
press all the liquid
Yeah.
out of it, and then you soak it again, and then press all the liquid out again, and then
Yep.
you had to roast it, and then you had to grind it into a powder, and then you had to mix it with something else as you cooked it. So it's like this crazy alchemical process in order to be able to digest something that actually still doesn't make you feel that good. It just fills you up.
Right.
And what a lot of people don't realize is the moment the grains became part of staple diets was the moment when the human population was down to almost zero,
Mm-hmm.
because the planet had undergone such a drastic catastrophe. And a lot of scientists don't want to admit that because they don't want to admit that future catastrophes can happen, right? They want it to be this gradual process. Any magician knows, though, that the tower is coming. So it's like you can't beat around the bush with it. All you can do is learn from the past. And in the past, when humans almost went extinct because the planet underwent such a drastic change, that we get our myths of Noah, of Atlantis, of these world floods that just inundated everything. Like the sea level rose 300 feet.
Mm-hmm.
We would be up shit creek without a paddle if the sea level rose 20 feet in half of the places that
Well, I was gonna say
humans
I
have
wouldn't. I'm in
populated.
Boulder, so I'm
You're
okay.
fine, but you also like have less oxygen. So there's that. But it's this idea of we don't we didn't realize what was coming
Mm-hmm.
completely. And then comet hit, glaciers melted, sea levels rose, people died. And they're like, how do we get the population back up? Because the population was actually quite big before that.
We
There's a
eat
reason
potatoes, apparently.
you eat
Whatever you got.
rice,
Yeah.
wheat, and corn. Those became the big three staples, right? North America, South America, it was corn, maize.
Mm-hmm.
In
China
in
and
Europe, it was wheat.
yep.
And in Middle East, it was wheat. And then in China, it was rice. In Asia, it was rice. So you get these three huge staple crops that now dominate the planet, along with soy.
Mm-hmm.
And those four were introduced in order to make people grow bigger and fatter and dumber quicker so they would have babies faster and then die without causing a ruckus. And when you ferment those foods,
Mission accomplished.
yeah, basically you become addicted. It triggers your dopamine centers. It messes
Mm-hmm.
with your serotonin levels, and a lot of people don't want to admit that because they love them because it messes with your dopamine receptors.
Yeah, and it's also well, it's everywhere. The whole idea of
Yeah.
like how many ever China, whatever the thing was, like that saying back in the day, it's like how can they be wrong? And it's like well, because that's what is available to eat. It doesn't mean that it's the thing that we need to be eating. You
Right.
know, think about Ireland, and again, I think
They
that this
didn't
is
have
something that
potatoes
they knew
until
about. Well, no, but
yeah.
that's the thing. Like when they had the potato blight, it was like, well, this is what we're used to eating. It's like, all right, well, those were those crops brought over? And it was like this is what you have to eat. This is what the British Army was planting so that they had to consume
Mm-hmm.
it. Like it makes you
It
wonder
was
about
intentional.
yeah the whole idea of every all of this being kind of planned, right?
Oh yeah. Oh
So
yeah. And it was the next generation of humans. There's a reason the Mayan myth has three levels of humans who come around. There's the reason that the Egyptians have the Neteru, the Shemsuhor, and then the dynasties. There's a
yeah,
reason that there's these like triplicities, and it's because this has happened more than once.
mm-hmm,
And so when we get to these things in terms of alchemy in the body, and this is what the talk was that I did for the summit with Morgan, um, for Inner Alchemy Summit, was literally the inner alchemy of what this stuff does to you. And our brains began steadily shrinking once we started
mm-hmm,
eating these on the regular basis. Our teeth started to decay and rot. We got
mm-hmm,
malocclusion of the jaw, so we couldn't bite properly anymore. And we started experiencing what they call diseases of civilization, of osteoporosis and
mm-hmm,
arthritis and gastrointestinal issues, cancers. And now Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS and all sorts of autoimmune things like lupus. It all began during what they call the agricultural revolution and what I like to call like the Neolithic crash.
mm-hmm.
There's just none of that is found in the archaeological record prior to those grains and seed plants being introduced.
Well, again, coming back to just like the challenges that we face, it is amazing to me that that has been my Achilles heel. That's been my devil card. You know, sugar in whatever
Also,
form has been,
your Saturn is in Virgo.
yeah, which is
That means this is
that's
your life
tough.
lesson. Literally gonna
It
be your
is
lesson your whole life.
at some point I will, I will put down all protein bars and I will not drink, the occasional milk in my coffee. I will not drink coffee. It's like there are all these things that have been lessons for me from the time that I was a kid that have been, have been big staples in my diet. And I like I said, I started doing this in 2011 with realizing what was wrong with my diet and changing a lot of stuff and kind of getting on this path, and it is still not corrected. So it's
Because it's your life lesson.
it is because it's something that it is always going to be there, and that's the hard thing too, because I was talking about like not being too strict and stringent on it and not going the complete ascetic route or whatever when it comes to eating. Like if you go hardcore and you don't make it past that month and a half or whatever, like when I stopped eating bread, I went a month and a half without eating bread, and it was one of the hardest months and a half since, of my life. But it has not been anytime I've had bread since then. I feel it. I feel bad. I know what I feel like if I continue to eat it, so I don't do it. So when it comes to sugars and caffeine, that was a big thing too. I'd gotten off of caffeine for a while, and then I ended up back on the horse. So it's a constant challenge too, and it's like it's those are
I
those
think it's
basic simple
also
things that we look at and we go, it's just a cup of coffee, it's just a pastry, it's just a bagel, and it's like no, that's the devil. It's
well, it's
literally
a
devil in a cup.
personality thing too, right? Where some
Yeah.
people, I think there's like a generation who has Saturn in certain places that make it much more difficult to incorporate food into a magical practice and lifestyle, like a literal lifestyle of dieta.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain sun incarnations that also make it a little more difficult to embrace a lifestyle where your body is thriving and not indulging or denying, right? Because
Right.
that's the seesaw. The seesaw is either completely remove it or completely obsess over it. And you have to step off of the seesaw and say, I'm actually just nourishing myself.
Right.
And this is a good thing for my body, and it tastes good to me because I'm recognizing that it's a good thing for my body in order to do the spiritual work. And so I think that's like an internal compass a lot of people have to navigate. And that's something where astrology really comes in handy for people, where I could give you a permission slip to say, this will take you time. You don't have to cold turkey it. You don't have to be like Amy. You don't have to just suddenly drop it all and eat keto, because your part of your incarnation this lifetime is to learn how all of this works in the body and in other people's bodies, how to heal the body physically, because that's what Virgo obsesses over. And to have Saturn in Virgo. So Saturn, the symbol of Saturn is also the symbol of lead in alchemy.
Right.
And in chemistry itself. So when you write that symbol of Saturn on someone's star chart, you're saying this is where the calcination process begins. This is where the ego will die over and over and over and over, and they cannot get away from it.
Until you get it.
Until you get it. And my sun, like the degree of my sun in Virgo, is conjunct Anton's Saturn in Virgo.
Mm.
So he literally cannot get away from his life lesson on a daily basis because I embody it. So, like, from an astrological synastry standpoint, our relationship probably will go a long time, probably until he dies, because I am here to do that. And on top of that, he has a son whose Virgo sun position is almost in the same point, and a sun whose rising Virgo position is almost in the same point. So he's literally confronted with his life lesson every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And that Saturn has no choice but to be constantly engaging in his mindset, that life lesson of what Virgo embodies, of how to be as healthy in the body as possible, how to serve others, how to take care of yourself and take care of others, how to step into a place of excellence without paralyzing perfection, how to always strive for the best and be completely content with where you're at. And it's not easy.
Oh, I was going to say, and I thought it was going to be a challenge. Oh, that sounds...
And everybody's Saturn does different things. Part of my Saturn lesson is to learn how to laugh at stuff because I take everything seriously.
Right. It is interesting how those things are correlates too, because like my brother, like I said, my brother's a Virgo, you're a Virgo, Blue is a Virgo, so like just being able to be there for his first and second year was like a big thing to kind of see how he was represented, or how Virgo is represented as in a child. Seeing how Virgo is represented in a female who was at one point an older sister of mine. Seeing how my older brother is represented as a Virgo, my dad is a Virgo, my mom's a Taurus, like I said. So I'm getting a little bit more of the fun Earth, not so much of you guys. But it's like I feel like too, as the air sign
and
in
you're
the
Cat
family,
rising, so you're literally trying to rise towards
constantly
a grounded, hardworking, practical person.
Yeah. So, but I have to feel like as the air sign in people's lives too, like I'm also dropping, and this also proves that you only need a little bit of air. Like I'm the one air sign that took care of a lot of those lessons for my family members. So,
just a breath of fresh air for all of those garden plots.
You just need a little bit. So I'm grateful for the role that I have too, because it is constantly coming back and hitting me in the face of what my lesson is, because once you realize it too, you can't ignore it, and if you do, then it just is it's even more present. It's literally the elephant in the room, and it's like, well,
Well,
this is the thing that I say that I have to do that I'm not doing.
my favorite astrology analogy that one of the mentors in Deborah Silverman's applied astrology program used during one of our live calls was Saturn placement in your chart is like the SWAT team coming to your house. And there's been like a meth den in your basement for 2 years. And there's just no way to escape it. It happens. They barrel down the door. They tear the place apart.
That was here when I got here, guys. That's not mine.
It's just not my fault. And they're like, let's clean this up, shall we? And the North Node, which a lot of people get really focused on because they get excited to find out about their secret mission in life. The North Node is like the Jehovah's Witness coming to your house. And they knock on the door and you can decide, do I open it? Do I have this conversation? Do I want to sit down and like theologically debate whether or not I have to join a cult? Or be like, I already am in cult. I just want to talk to you about my cult.
How much time do you guys have?
Yeah. Do you want to sit down? Do you want some tea? Do you want some psilocybin? And like be in that space. So on that note, I hear a baby crying.
Okay.
Yeah. And I love you, and I love alchemy, and I love magic, and I would love, love, love everyone to go to your Patreon and go to my Patreon and get to learn more about all of this stuff.